like to thank our sponsors. So Ray and Judy Dewey of Santa Fe, J3 Fund of Taos, Fighting Bear Antiques of Jackson, Wyoming, Medicine Man Gallery of Tucson, Arizona, and Don Lamb of Chicago. Now I would like to introduce and turn it over to mi vecina, mi amiga, Juanita Lavadie.
All right, good. Thank you all for coming today. Happy Valentine's Day. And I'll go ahead and start with this. This is a presentation, as I will introduce, that was started in the late 1970s and 1980s. And it kind of sat for a while. And so there's a lot of information that has since evolved, because what I'm going to be presenting is a family story. So it's not a scholarly presentation. It has a lot to do with stories I've heard since I was a little girl. So I will go ahead and start. I'll be reading, I'll be breaking through and doing some interjections here, but it will be mostly read. Soy Juanita Lavadie, una maestra licenciada y artista multimedia, sangre ancestral por Taos y Río Arriba. Por mi papá, del Valle San Luis, familia Jaques Chacón. Y del Valle Escondido, por Cañón de Vallecitos, Río Arriba, familia Jaramillo. Por lado maternal, desde Costilla y Taos, familia Trujillo y Trujillo. Por Peñasco, el Valle, Trampas, Chimayo y Santa Cruz, de familia Montoya Montes Vigil. Eduardo Lavadie era mi marido, para que estoy acá para presentar algo de mi familia, lado de los Montoyas de El Valle. Since childhood, I listened to voices of different family elders relating consejos and dichos, stories. As a novice weaver in the early 1980s, questions evolved from my own creative endeavors. Inspired by La Academia de la Nueva Raza, a regional gathering of scholars and thinkers, I set out to research my family's oral history, stories, while elders were still alive, not as a scholar so much as an artist with questions. Now, 2026, instead of having access to ancestors and family elders for reality checks, I have my own set of years of documentation notes and can confidently rely on intuition and memory. I haven't lost my memory yet. Personal intergenerational connections were crucial. To give a sense of that, I will begin with a story about my tia Ramoncita. She was my grandma's older sister. Ramoncita Vigil Pacheco lived in Trampas in what was the Manuel Atencio house on the northwest foothills overlooking the valley. This adobe home does not exist anymore, but it was recognized as one of the oldest Spanish colonial homes in northern New Mexico. Entre la familia, tia Ramoncita was endearingly called Toyita, just like the other beloved Montoya tias from El Valle. Nearly 100 years old, she still had the ability to hop out of bed in the morning to end the day with her Salem cigarette and her little traguito. She was 97 when she broke her hip on a fall, an injury typical for a small-boned woman of advanced age. Her body reflected her age, but not her spirit. It was hard to say what was more wrinkled, her face or her hands. There was not a square inch on her face that was left without marks of time and hardship, yet her eyes sparkled along with her wit, her chistes, adivinanzas, and her sense of humor. She lived in the mountain village of Trampas long after Tío Pacomio died. He had big bigotes, his mustache, and siempre en pecheras, overalls, siempre trabajando en el campo. I remember the visits with Tío out in the Resolana, the baked adobe walls in the sun. We would gather for family photos, our backs against those warm sun-baked adobe surfaces that reflected back golden sunlight and, over time, golden memories. This was where tia Ramoncita lived and raised her family. Content that her health was too obvious to overlook. In spite of her protest, she had to move to extended family away from her beloved Trampas. Then she fell and broke her hip, ending up in the Holy Cross Hospital in Taos. During and after her surgery, doctors were hesitant to give her heavy sedatives because of her age and petite frame. She was delirious with pain when I arrived. Tia was incensed, lively furious with the doctors and yelling at them with expletive phrases easily and clearly understood both in Spanish and in English. Once her wrath was spent on the doctors and they left, she turned to me as I stood nearby. After expressing her recognition and cariño, her fragile hand would grasp mine tightly as we talked. During our conversation, a subtle shift occurred. She was talking to Juanita, but it wasn't me. Then she acknowledged Pablita in the conversations and talked about other things I didn't recognize immediately. Still holding conversation with her, I realized then what was happening. In her mind, she was talking to me while she also visited with her tias, her Montoya tias, on an intimate person-to-person level. I was connecting with these ancestors as a participant in the conversation, and the talk just kept right on rolling. From the stories I heard over the years, I knew who the Toita tias were. With a practice protocol of the respeto for family elders, I stayed within the unorthodox context of conversation, extending my appreciation to my Montoya great-grandtias through my grandmother's older sister. Needless to say, it was a vivid impression, transcending time to experience a surreal family connection. The research on star readings and Valle ancestors began in the mid-1970s while I studied traditional wool cloth at Las Vegas with Maestro David Cisneros from Rivera, New Mexico. Seeing this interest in my weaving, Grandma Pilar shared stories about working with wool as a young girl, telling me about the tasks that she was required to help out with. The Valle Textiles story began to unfold back, yielding precious gems of information and expanding familial awareness. I wouldn't have appreciated all of Tia Ramoncita's conversation in the hospital if I hadn't had this background of connection. In 1987, I was invited to participate in a panel discussion hosted by the Museum of New Mexico International Folk Art, moderated by Helen Lucero, the annual national meeting of the American Ethnographic Association. I presented in 3 parts the Valle weavings. Well, I don't call them star weavings because the Valle was actually the 3rd part, but the star weavings and the 4-generation span of the Montoya weavers. I also identified falsehoods concerning some of these family members that continued to be published. Trazada del Valle por la parentela Montoya, the family tree. Part 1, the legacy of the El Valle Trazada. I don't know how many of you had a chance to see the weavings on exhibit, but I'm talking about a particular blanket that is in the chapel, and it's the weaving with the 5 stars. This is the pattern that I will be looking at. I'm not going to present anything just yet, any visuals. Access to the elders gave me the ability to record firsthand experience and memory accounts, gathering in my anciano's native tongue, New Mexican Spanish. A motivating incentive was the uniqueness and striking design of these textiles, soon to be shown here. Research progressed beyond hearing and collecting stories. The opportunity came to examine specific cherished collections of textiles never seen outside of the family home. Previously anonymous El Valle weavers were identified with certain design but innovations specifically attributed to family individuals. Prior assumptions and false stories were addressed, but more questions came to mind about specifics, and many yet are still left unanswered, left for speculation. Primary research sought out extended family members who knew not only the location of some of these blankets, but the provenance of each one as well, the established progression of owners through the following generations. Originally, these blankets were woven for family, not as market pieces. They may have been used in economic transactions, but they were created for the pleasure of the family and for the personal challenge of the weaver's skills. Research design. It's focused specifically on the Valle Frisada design, characterized by 5 8-pointed stars and flagrant enthusiasm for color combinations. There are 5 stars, 1 at each corner of the blanket, with the 5th star located in the center. The background is a complex of concentric diamonds outlined by an intricate zigzag pattern. The vertical borders are embellished with manitas, plumas, or tulipanes. It looks like tulips. As the research progressed, some of the similarities remained consistent, but variations did appear in materials, in star placement, and in the borders. The original format was found in saltillo fresadas woven by the Tlaxcala native weavers in central Mexico. In the mid-late 1700s, these fresadas showed up in recorded cambalaches, trade fairs, along the Camino Real, up into the Southern Platte River in northern Colorado, touching into Wyoming. This is the pack of the Mexican traders, or the Comancheros, also as they were called. These are people who would leave these communities here with goods, efectos del país, products from our harvests, and to take them across the plains or up the North River to the north in exchange for whatever it was that they could encounter that would be good to bring back to this location. So these blankets actually made their way into many places. The vertical board, the original design was, the 1979 publication of the Museum of New Mexico Folk Art, The Spanish Textile Tradition of New Mexico and Colorado. It has an article on saltillo blankets by Joe Ben Huit, and states many of the design features of the Mexican saltillo serape were taken over by the Rio Grande weavers, Spanish settlers of New Mexico. The earliest intricate tapestry design weaving in New Mexico was done in 1807 to 1809 in Santa Fe by two brothers that were brought up to enhance the weaving abilities of the weavers here of northern New Mexico. There were two commodities from the Rio Grande that went down that were very important. One of them was furs from the mountains up here, the wildlife animals, but a big shipment that would go down the Camino Real where the wool affects items made by the wool. And so it was a very important industry for survival for our antepasados here. No locally woven 8-pointed star tapestry weavings have been identified from this time period, although weavings with other saltillo design motifs were woven by local weavers taught by the Bazan brothers. This developed the Camino Real market into central Mexico for merchandise from our tierra adentro del norte. And another specialty that was really big, and I am doing research on Comanches and Ciboleros, the old-time buffalo hunters, but another commodity that was very prized was the smoked buffalo tongues from the hunts. In the same, I want to stop real quick because I'm talking about this publication. This was the publication I'm talking about. It was published by the Museum of International Folk Art, and I know there's been several books on Rio Grande weavings, but this one is a really comprehensive collection of authorities, of different anthropologists, of weavers, of museum curators, but it covers everything starting with the efectos del país and going on into the different generations and the different styles of the weavings that came out of here. So it is a book, if you're a weaver with interest in weavings here, this book I highly recommend. It was a limited edition, but there are copies that have been available online. Okay, through this publication, Vallero blankets by Nora Fisher, 3 major periods of the star New Mexico fresadas were identified. The first period was the earliest from the mid-1800s, using 3-ply Saxony yarn that arrived in New Mexico through before the very beginning of the Camino for the Santa Fe Trail. The dyes were used for the Saxony yarns were cochineal red and largely vegetal dyes. Second phase, by the 1960s, 4-ply Germantown yarns were arriving using synthetic aniline dyes. And this is the first time commercial dyes start to appear. They're made out of coal, and they were very vivid. These dye colors of the from the Germantown, the aniline dyes were fugitive, meaning they tended to fade. During this time period, weavers and blanket provenances have not really been clearly identified, but you can tell how bright the colors were if you have a very delicate hand and you take a piece of available yarn and just untwist it, and you can see inside what the colors were like, and they were very, very, very vivid. So the third period, late 1800s to the 1900s, an identified series of 8-pointed star fresadas blankets came out from the village of Valle, located between Peñasco and Trampas in Taos County. This third grouping of the Vallero blankets were woven by the Montoya family of Valle with their distinctive texture and handle. patriarch Jose Ignacio Montoya was a weaver of experience, and he probably saw a role of early versions of the bayero, later popularized by his offspring. Characteristics of early Montoya weavings include hand-spun plied wool or cotton yarn, mixed breed fibers, hand-spun weft yarn, using some with the churro sheep and other mixtures that were most likely, there was merino, but also there was evidence of the Corriedale, the Ramulate Corriedale sheep that were here. And of course, the most important feature of some of these weavings was the bright aniline colors. These weavings also include a seam center because the textile was woven on two narrow legs and hand stitched together in the middle. If you see the loom that's on the on display, that's actually a very fine loom. The lumber that's used is milled lumber. Oftentimes, it wasn't that fine. So the looms were very massive. And once you have them compiled together to make room for the different working parts of a loom, the weaving width was not really that wide. So for some of these textiles, they would be woven and then stitched together in the middle. However, not necessarily with the Valle weavings, but there was the doble ancha, which is using the multiple harness loom used for twill weaving for the hergas. That was the work cloth. And an early phase of that we to recognize our use of the twill is denim, because that was a twill. It's very serviceable, so it's used for apparel, for pack bags, or in cases here in New Mexico, oftentimes for the chapels, you would find a roll of herga coming off the loom that was used for the walkway of the chapel going up to the altar. But if you have a good, real pair of denim jeans, you're going to see it's a twill. And we actually have denim coming from the word denim, which means that these a lot of these cloths were actually woven in Nimes, France. But this is a twill. This is the twill that was used. However, the weaving for the piazadas was tapestry, and that's using colored yarns and intricate designs. So some of the Hispaniola descendants of Martina Montoya Lopez referred to the trampas blanket and referred to these as the trampas blanket. Martina lived in Truchas, but her younger sister, also Juanita, lived in Las Trampas. According to one of Martina's granddaughters, a late 1980s Chimayo vendor, Esquipula Trujillo, had a shop, and he sold these as the trampas design. And he built up a market for it in Santa Fe. And he first brought this blanket in Las Trampas, no date indicated. So I'm going to introduce the family. The Montoya weavers of the 1800s. The early Montoya weavers have been called Los Montoyitas de Chimayo, or Las Toyitas, endearingly by the family. The parents of the noted weavers, Jose Ignacio Montoya was born in 1818, and Guadalupe Martinez, his wife, was born in 1830. They were married in Santa Cruz. They lived in Chimayo until they later moved into El Valle. Jose Ignacio Montoya was been remembered as Rubio, or Güero, with a light complexion, ojos arcos, hazel eyes, and he had freckles, and he was also a weaver. They had 2 sons and 7 daughters. Their offspring. The oldest was Jesus Maria Montoya, date of birth 1846. Pablita Montoya, 1849. Victor Montoya, date of birth 1852. Ramoncita Montoya, 1854. Petrita Montoya, my great-grandma, was 1856. Patricia Montoya, 1858. Martina Montoya, date of birth 1860. Juanita Montoya, 1861. And Doloritas Montoya, 1861. From information collected from conversations, the offspring of Jose Ignacio and Guadalupe Montoya were exposed to the processes working with wool, and they knew how to weave. Though not all siblings continued with the weaving. Using the words of my grandma Pilar Vigil Trujillo, todos sabían urdir y repasar. They all knew how to warp a loom, and they knew how to throw a shuttle. The consecutive generation to generation link of active weavers has continued through the descendants of Jose Maria Montoya, the oldest son, and of Martina Montoya, one of the younger sisters. Other Montoya siblings actively involved in weaving was Patricia, a prominent weaver, and Doloritas, who wove on a marginal basis. There are nieces and nephews and grandchildren who continue and to create in family tradition. And I have to put it in note here, because this was done in the 1680s. If I was to talk to you today, I could describe many descendants of the Montoyas who are actively involved in the Spanish colonial arts, whether it's weaving, whether it's working on wood, or whether it's working with making santos, but it has continued. And also scholars. And this was another tradition with the Montoyas that they were known for. And I hear the stories of this. Oftentimes when there were family gatherings, the Montoya sisters were individually, they would be invited to recite. And so this is something that was, they were very well known for, the recitation of passages from the Bible or poetry that they had learned through their youth. The Montoyas were predominantly red-headed. They had freckles. And they were very strict in their sense of propriety. Women did not cut their hair short. And for their clothing, they did not wear short sleeves. So this would be my shoulders. I'm not exposing with my top of my arms, but I am exposing my elbows. However, for working, you do roll up your sleeves, right? Above your elbows. Yeah. So anyway, women did not. One, self-discipline and good skills were highly valued, and family members were very resourceful. One niece raised by one of the tias recalls that the emphasis on dolls was not to play, but to learn how to sew. The memorization of prayers and adivinanzas is common, but many of the recollections about these women 3-4 generations back. Although some were unable to read, many of the Montoyas in their later years frequently recited from family gatherings, as I just told you. When it came to family oral history, they were a wealth of information and enjoyed sharing these traditions with younger family members. Considering the complexity of the Valle design system, how they kept track of what they had already woven and rolled up on the loom, what was the mnemonic formula? How could they weave such intricate patterns in one shot and then start another weaving so that these pieces match so well? And I have to admit, with my weaving, when I've tried this, and I'm looking at those saltillo blankets where they're weaving with something akin to thread, and those pieces are joined in the middle with almost perfect matching. I get goosebumps. I can't imagine that degree of concentration and accuracy. Considering the complexity of the design, how do they keep track of it? One niece who wove referred to counting thread and motif patterns by name. There's the culebria. The culebria is a zigzag pattern. Culebra is a snake in Spanish. There's the calabrote, which is a chain. And those are the chained hourglasses that you see edging on the concentric diamonds. There's the banco, which is the steps. The steps is another design. And the manita, or the palma, the tulipas, which is the little hand or the tulips that you see on some of the borders. For Elana Montoya Chimayo, Martina Lopez's grandson referred to the cinta, or the belt that she used to use with a knot for each major shift in design during the first half of the weaving. The large knot would designate the center. Once the weaving was completed, Martina would remove the first half from the loom and have that alongside for reference while weaving the second to match, and using that cinta also to keep track of the tension. When you're weaving with wool under tension. Once you take the weaving off the loom, the tension is released, so it's going to shrink back a little bit. So the accuracy of matching is quite a diligent process. So I want to go now with the slides. So I'm going to go through specific weavers. And I will have to say, when I did start this process, it started from oral history of childhood. It's very loose. It's not a scholarly account, but also out of respect for a lot of the owners of some of these blankets, I did make an agreement that I'm not going to mention names of the owners. And of course, that was in the 1980s. So it has since changed. So I don't know where some of these weavings are, but it's okay. I documented what I did. The main generation of the weavers with direct offspring was, this is the entrance to El Valle. When you are riding to El Valle off the road, going to Peñasco, the first thing you're going to see is the Campo Santo. Next slide, please. So this one was the home of Patricia Montoya back in the 1980s. I don't know if it exists, if it's still there. I don't think it is, yeah. So Elmer Shoup, a Taos curio dealer of artifacts, was E. Boyd's source for identifying Patricia Montoya as the major weaver of the Vallero blanket. Historians embellished his collections for sale, identifying Patricia Montoya as a crippled girl from El Valle with a special loom that her father made for her. This was a fabrication. It was probably a good sales pitch. Family members remember that she did have a facial disfiguring in her age, which might have been a broken nose, but Patricia was not a crippled girl. I find the story still repeated in many shops selling traditional northern New Mexico artwork and textiles. So I have corrected many owners of the shops, but it just needs to be, this is a story that Elmer Shoup fabricated. So the first sign, okay, the Camposanto, many descendants of Petrita tended to recall Patricia's weaving expertise, probably because both Patricia and her older sister, Petrita, remained in their home of El Valle. And in this home, it's important to know that both Patricia and her younger sister, Martina, were remembered as the best weavers of the family. They also wove for Cito Calendario, who had a store in Santa Fe. Aesthetic blankets woven by Patricia and those woven by Martina show specific characteristic preferences in border motifs. Okay, you can turn to the next slide. Oh, that's El Valle. Okay, go ahead, next one. So this is the star blanket. Okay, in Taos, Pilar Trujillo, Petrita Montoya's youngest daughter, had 2 Vallero blankets. One of them she donated to the Guadalupe Church in Taos as a fundraiser in the 1940s for a raffle, which was won by somebody in Arroyo Hondo, and I never could find out the name of who won that blanket. The other blanket was given to her daughter, who sold it to another family member to pay for home building expenses. This is a good example of Patricia border design with the manitas and the tulip designs. You can see the small tulips here on the end. They're light colored. It looks like they outlined by the gray. And then you have the culebrillas running over here. The calabrotes outlining the different blankets. And each star would be woven with an octagon. Now the octagon, as in this case, this is a Patricia blanket, was outlined by a gray calabrote. I think the one that's on exhibit is not outlined. I think it's plain. But so there were variations that each weaving would have. Let's see which one here. Ramoncita Pacheco recalled owning 2 of Patricia Vallero's blankets with what she called rosas. She didn't call them stars, she referred to them as rosas. One was traded to Mora, to an Atencio family for livestock and food supplies. And the other Fresada de Rosas was stolen many years ago when she washed it and left it out to dry. So just knowing the value of some of these blankets even back then is good to know. In Taos, let's see. So go ahead to the next one. I think this one has a detail and stuff. So the wool that was woven for this was a combination of different sheep breeds. Most of the woven blankets were used both either, well, it depends. Some of them used wool warp, and some of them used cotton warp. But the tightness of the weaving usually denotes that it was the wool warp that was used, because that was the wool with the wool weft over time tends to, the fibers tend to blend and felt a little bit, so it adds to the the stability of the blanket. Okay, where am I here? Okay, so go ahead to the next slide. One of Petrita Montoya's granddaughters owned a prime Vallero blanket woven by Patricia. And again, here you see the embellishment of the tulip designs and the culebria going up and down. And in this case, the octagon is not it's not outlined by another color, but it does have the serrate edging. And okay, so the weaving passed on from the weaver to the current owner. This piece, perhaps the best example of how, oh, the next slide. Okay, this piece will denote, gosh, it looks kind of faded to me because I remember what this is like. It is vivid. I mean, it would put, I'm going to reveal my age when I say Next, who was it? The psychedelic artist in, yeah, there you go. It just was so vivid. The colors were so vivid and so garish almost. But in this particular case, the blanket has been carefully kept in the family homes. And I think I used a quarter there to give you a size of scale. One of Petrita's, the piece is the best example of how freshly dyed animal color might have looked. Having been carefully stored from vague causing sunlight, the colors are almost dyed and woven, almost as if just dyed and woven. Okay, go ahead and do the next. So this is a detail of the borders. So there's a lot of work that went into these. It was not just the designing, but it's amazing to me how they kept track of this. When I did my weaving of the Valle blankets, I used a graph paper to help me design that, to keep track of it. Also, Bertha also owned 2 samplers, we thought to be woven by Patricia. Go ahead to the next one. And so this is a variation using crochet. And I think Mark Blanchard had some, when he did the presentation, I don't know how many of you are here for his presentation on the Rio Grande textiles, but he had some that were crocheted. So, it was something that was not unusual. And here you see the bancos, the step design is a geometric square design. So, expand, okay. Okay, so I want to talk about Martina Montoya Lopez, the 7th of the Montoya offsprings in her weavings. Martina lived in Trampas once she married, and many of her descendants moved to Chimayo, Cuarteles, and Santa Cruz. Okay, you can go ahead for the next one. Oh, this is still Bertha's pieces. So this is another piece. It's just variations, whether it's small samplers or large fersadas, but there was a predominance of star weavings that were produced by the Montoya weavers from El Valle. So this particular piece was a late Vallero weaving woven by Martina for her son's wedding anniversary around the 1930s. It's now owned by her, well, I say now owned, that was 1980s. It was owned at the time by her daughter-in-law. Although it was woven by Martina, it shows border motifs as they appear on most of Patricia Montoya's weavings that we looked at. Not only, okay, go ahead and move to the next one. I want to the star, the center star. It was not rigidly confined to specific motifs or materials. Changes and nuances always occurred. This piece was woven with commercial yarn, not hand-spun yarn. And one of Martina's blankets, once owned by one of her grandsons. The next piece, please. Next slide. This one is now the Taos Pueblo home since the 1980s. The borders are more typical of those woven by Martina, but the yarn is considerably coarser. Go ahead with the close-up. This is probably because the children of the extended family often helped with wool preparations for weaving, not just cleaning wool, but also in spinning. They had to learn how to spin. Where you start spinning, you just learn, you just do it the best you can. And if it's not that good, it will always be used anyway because it's time consuming. The love and enthusiasm working with wool, whether spinning or working on intricate designs, was not always appreciated among family members like my grandmother, who remembered it as a chore. She didn't talk about it until I started reading. So, Anita Martinez from Cuarteles once mentioned that her grandmother Martina invented the trampas blanket design. Well, Martina was born in 1860, and there have been star motif blankets woven since the mid-1800s and earlier. She may have been one of the first in the family to weave a study of these star blankets and develop her own detail motifs. But there were other weavers within the nuclear family, and it would be difficult to establish the number of descendants that continued weaving, along with her own prolific design. I suppose Martina could be considered the weaving matriarch because she had the most descendants that were weaving, that continued with weaving. Go ahead, continue. Another one of Martina's weavings. Okay. Yeah, that's the same piece that we just looked at. Okay, now this one is one of Martina's weavings, but it lacks the center star. But the chevron or the half chevron motifs become more complex in this particular textile border. Also, the center star, well, the center star is missing. So it's a 4-star Vallero. It was brought out from Martina's nephew, who sold it to another family member to help pay for his debts. And these how these blankets kind of move within the family. You know, they weren't for marketing. It wasn't for marketing. So all these blankets, as I said, that I was able to document, were never part of any museum collection or of any collector. These were all family pieces. Eboyd mentions Martina Lopez in her book Popular Arts of Spanish New Mexico, but she never realized that Martina and Patricia were sisters, along with the other prominent family leaders of the Vallejo blanket. So I'm going to move on to Doloritas. Another of the Montoya sisters was Doloritas, who was in poor health, so she didn't weave that many to the capacity of Patricia or Martina. A granddaughter of Petrita recalls that some of the family members were used to pay a doctor, Dr. Bowen, for expenses incurred. Go ahead, the next. 2 blankets were brought out during this interview that were woven by the Montoyas. One, the weaver is not clearly identified, but it has a basic background of the format of the concentric diamonds. Go on with the next one. So this one was a culebria design that dominates with a Vallejo type border that was woven by Tia Doloritas. So I'm going on to the next generation from the direct descendants of Jose Inés Montoya. So it's identifying the list, and it's incomplete because at that time I did the best that I could, but it was really not a really focused scholarly research. So I interviewed the people that I had access to. Genoveva Lopez Montoya, daughter Martina, was another leader of the family. Genoveva wove with hand-spun yarn. Identified pieces have not been photographed, but she also did commercial yarn. She wove seam center blankets, and she used a 4-harness loom. She wove the doble anchas, or the double width. And I think I explained that. The doble ancha is when you have a multiple harness loom. I'm going to set this up. So you're weaving across the loom, across the other side, and you're coming down, and you keep going back and forth. So it works pretty well with stripes. Is this okay still? But to do the tapestry designs is a whole other thing, because I can't imagine weaving one layer and then having another match on the other side. But this was something that was also accomplished. Okay, I said Genoveva. Okay, Maclovia, Genoveva's sister, was also a weaver and remembered for her star pattern weavings, although I didn't identify any specific blankets that were woven by her. Manuel was an older son of Jose Maria Montoya, the oldest sibling of the Montoyas. Go on to the next one. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I just skipped that one. This is Doloritas. Oh, Genoveva. This is woven by Genoveva. Okay, so go on to the next one. Okay, this particular piece was owned by my grandmother, and it was identified as woven by Manuel, who was the older son of the oldest son. So it's a Vallejo with the design without the stars, woven around 1910 for my great grandfather Trinidad Montes Vigil as payment for work done. Although it is woven without the ink-pointed star, this is a Vallejo blanket because of the weaver's genealogy and all the other design similarities it contains. The yarn used in this piece is much coarser than that used of any other of the pieces identified. I have to say this one was woven on a cotton warp and was very unstable. It was intact, but it's not stable. So this piece is currently with the Nelson Rogers Museum, along with the documentation of the weaver and the provenance on this particular piece. So we're going to go on to Longino. Manuel's younger brother, also the son of Jesus Maria, married Martina Montoya Lopez's daughter, Genoveva, his first cousin. They both knew how to weave, although Genoveva was a more prolific weaver. So we'll go on to the next one. So this one, Longino was the one who wove this piece, small star sample using floor-ply commercial yarn. And the next slide, Felix, Manuel and Longino's sister, was another weaver, Feliz. Manuel and Longino's sister was another weaver in their family. She passed away in the 1970s, but she left her legacy as seen in the weaving that we also collected. So this one is, okay, that was the third generation. Now we're talking the grandchildren of the Tias. Eremita Martinez learned how to spin, dye, and weave wool from her grandmother, Martina. And she also wove for the Ortegas in Chimayo. A retired school teacher, she once paid her way through college with her weavings. And there's Froilan Froilán Montoya was the son of Longino and Genoveva. Both Froilán and Sylvia, his sister, probably had the most extensive exposure to family weavers from both parents. In addition to the Valle design, Froilán was very proud of his production of the 2 Gray Hills design. Only one in Chimayo, he would tell me. He had found the Navajo blanket more difficult one to weave. I found that curious. When I asked him why he did not find the star design so difficult, he chuckled and said that it was, well, each weaving is different, he said. And so he brought forth this piece, and he said, ahí se va. So meaning, just do it. So now I'm going to the 4th generation. Okay, and he also wove this piece for his granddaughter, Rita. So he brought this one, insisting that I had to photograph it. So it's a tail. Now this is more of the Chimayo design, where you have the solid background with the stripes, and then you have your tapestry design, but it's more like an embellishment than part of the whole composition of design. So let's see. Okay, the 4th and 5th generation, ongoing, continuing weavers. And this was done 1980s. There's more weavers since the research that I've done, and I haven't gone back to research it, but the family has flourished. So what can I say about that? Okay, Lucy Montoya also wove with her father, Froilán, and she was teaching her daughter, the granddaughter Froilán, Peggy, who also was learning how to weave at that time. And then you have my pieces. So this is the first piece that I did with my study of Valle design. I was curious about the story of the family, so and this is just my own play on it with the comet. And colors used here is using a little bit the physics of light with the Doppler effect. And I guess the best way to explain the Doppler effect is you hear a siren coming at you, and it comes really high. As soon as it passes, the frequency drops and the sound drops. So the high frequency of the blues and the low frequency of the reds. Let's see. Okay, this first effort was an experimental piece before really looking at the structural compositions, and also with the weaving. Now, I did not get any direct instruction on weaving from within my family because it skipped 2 generations. So this is an exploration on my part. So this one is actually using an interlock tapestry design. Let me explain that real quick. You have your warp, the string that you're going to be weaving on. So if you have a thread and you're going to use combinations of colors, this one used the interlock, which is between the yarn fibers. So you have 2 yarns. I'm sorry, my apologies. You have 2 yarns coming together, and the interlock is that they come and the join between the warp. And it's a very strong structural way of doing tapestry. And you find this more with the Navajo. The Navajo tapestries use the interlock. But the other one that was used mostly by the Montoyas was a dovetail, which means the warp is coming and you have your colors coming through. It's not going to be vertical because it would build up a lot. So it'd be either with the serrate design or the block design shifting. But you have your warp and the dovetail goes around the warp and the other yarn comes on top. So they sit on top of each other around the warp. And it's also pretty solid design, obviously, since these weavings have held up so long. So move on to the next one. And this is a piece where I knew more about the Valle design. And this one is using the dovetail. But one of the things of this one is also at the Nelson Rogers Museum. This is woven in 2 pieces. And boy, do I have respect for those pieces that are joined, that you see in Saltillo and some of the Verdande weavings, where these weavings were done and they were stitched together to its almost perfect match. And this one, when I wove the second piece and I took it off, it didn't have the same exact measurement. So you can see some variations here on the seaming. But using steam and pressing and manipulating the yarns, the wool of it, I was able to get a very decent match. So at this point, you can turn this off because I want to go on to some projectors, some chart plot projections. Where did the star design come from? With a lot of the projections that you see from this, what was mentioned a lot is the influence of the quilts, the star pattern quilt. In the midst of the family legacy, questions kept coming to mind about the Valle blanket design. So how did the star come to be a characteristic of this large group of Rio Grande blankets? Asked Nora Fisher. She quotes Joe Van Wheat, who felt there was an influence from American quilts. The eight-pointed star appears in textile work of many Native American cultures, such as those in embroideries or brocades like the Guatemalan weavers, for example, or in the quill work, and the beadwork of the Plains tribes of the Midwest. But in the course of this work, there was a strong inclination towards an interesting and overlooked alternative for further research. In the late Middle Ages, the wealth of the Mozarabic Spain was not only in letters and scholarship, but in craftsmanship as well. Woodwork, architecture, ceramics, Cordovan leather, metalwork, and the textile work were excelled in quality of manufacture and design. Islamic Spain was a world center with textiles exported to Egypt and the Middle East. Commerce brought exchange from far away as the Caucasian territories of Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, we know the tradition there in the Caucasus weaving tradition. But this weaving industry of Islamic Spain was considered significant up until the time of the reconquest by the Castilianos. Then the Mudéjar Moors came to live under Christian rule. Publications by the National Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. identify 16th century Alcariz as the Mudéjar village in Andalusia, known for weavings with the eight-pointed star. This weaving center was patronized by Queen Isabella, the new Queen of Spain, and certainly she was in a position to be a trendsetter among the new loyal subjects, including those in the New World, especially in Mexico, the main contact with Europe. So the center trade of these roads coming to the New World, whether travel course through the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean. And that was another influence that I never had a chance to do, but the story of the trade routes of the Spanish during this early time period through the Philippines, they used the galleons. Those were really cumbersome ships. They were not meant as warships for maneuvering. These were very bulky ships that were packed with as much as they could. And so from the Philippines, using the trade routes in the winds, from Mexico, it's almost a direct route to go from Mexico to the Philippines. But from the Philippines, you have to take a northerly route going up almost under the curve of Alaska and then come down by the California coast. And that's where, what was the English pirate? Drake, yeah. That's where you'll find that a lot of these galleons were captured by Drake, or they were sunk. So there's a lot of, along that coast, there's a number of galleons that have been lost. So one interesting reference on Oriental and Middle East rugs linked the eight-pointed star with King Solomon, which includes folk stories referring to his ring of diamonds arranged into an eight-pointed star, as well as a large eight-pointed star diadem on his crown. According to the research published by the Textile Museum on Spanish Peninsular Textiles, the eight-pointed star emerges from the weaving collections in the inventory of King Martin of Aragon of 1410. Listed among his possessions of tapestries is one with a design called Al Segnals Salomons, the seal of Solomon in Latin. But the eight-pointed star appears in many fiber fabrications in the pre-Columbian American history, so it's a toss-up. Where did it come from? Well, it's just like gossip. Things move, they traverse, and they change. So we can go ahead and put this on again. I have to do this because it's hard on my eyes to have a screen, just to be looking at it. The Santa Fe Chihuahua trade routes between Mexico and the Rio Grande Valley had long been established. There were many saltillo blankets brought up into this area into northern New Mexico. There are Mexican tapestries that incorporated the eight-pointed star into the design patterns, although provenance is sketchy. So this piece was woven by Teresa Archuleta Spires, and it was a reproduction of a piece that she found on one of the shops in Santa Fe called 24 Mexican Stars. And I'm including Teresa here because she was a photographer when we would move through the family, and I'm not good with the camera, so I have to credit her with photographs that you were looking at. So with a fine imagination and a comet of ideas that flare out from the stories heard as a child growing up among the Rio Grande cultural traditions, Hearing stories while looking at vivid and intricate patterns of family heirlooms. Under blue New Mexico skies and a vivid earth pigment color palette, imagination is fired into daydreaming and speculations that spin off into ideas that seem to elude resolution for the time being. It inspires vision, a search, and interpretation. So time passes as the world grows in possibilities. The sky and the stars are the limits. So I want to recognize two people here, a number of people. The next slide, please. This is a photograph of my grandma, Petrita, and Agada Martinez was also one of the, but I have to, and behind you see the star blankets. This was an exhibit that was sponsored by the Cofradía de Artes y Artesanos. In the 1980s, it was there were two prominent movements. There was the Academia de la Nueva Raza, which was a think tank, but the Cofradía Artes y Artesanos was largely moved by Luis Tapia and Federico Vigil were the two proponents. And Federico Vigil, if you've ever been to the Hispanic Cultural Center in the tower, he had completed the fresco design on the inside. And so these were the two men that really promoted a lot of these exhibits. And this exhibit was in the Santuario in Santa Fe, the Santuario that's just off the main office of Cerrillos. And Agada Martinez, Agada was there, and my grandmother there. They hadn't seen each other in decades, and so throughout the whole exhibit and reception, they held hands. They didn't let go. So this photograph is a recognition of some of the descendants of the Montoya legacy. And if there's any descendants here, I'd like you to stand up. Senator Montoya, Connie, can you stand up? Larry, is there anyone else here? I know there were people that were planning on coming, but with the, so I have two fantastic artists. Connie is working does her crochet work and she's won many awards. And Lori, your work is well known too. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody else for coming. And so with this closure and recognition of the ancestors and the legacy that continues to grow, because I'm still meeting artists, I'm still meeting descendants that are add their skills. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to give honor to my ancestors. Thank you. Are there any questions? Anybody have any questions? Well, if you to go into the exhibit rooms, you will see the piece that is by Patricia. And if you go into the Saltillo, you will see the influence of the weavings that came up. Yes?
I was just wondering if the line of Montoyas that you're part of had any connection to Simeon Turley.
Your bloodline? I don't think so. I don't know of any connection.
Different Montoyas.
The Montoyas? The Turley?
Yeah.
Okay, it could be because it wasn't, well, okay, you saw the list that I had, the 9 siblings, and that was way back in the 18, yeah, so the prolific, you know, it's very easy. And I'm still meeting. As a matter of fact, this past Christmas, I did participate with the Pastorela, which is a traditional production of the story of the shepherds, the Bethlehem shepherds. And so we did the performance in Chimayo, and I was sitting with one of the people who attended the performance, and you know, I'm talking about Froilano, and he's looking at me, and he says, "Froilano is my dad." And he was active with the theater productions, but I didn't get into. But it was just one of those connections that keep popping up. You know, you just never know. But it'd be interesting to make that connection.
Cousins by the dozens.
Cousins by the dozens, exactly. And talented cousins. Any other questions?
Is Froilano, is he still alive?
No, he passed away. So the last time I saw him was in late 1980s. And so I think it was the early 1900s, more or less, that he passed away. I know he's no longer with us. But I kept hearing about him. if you're familiar with the pastorela, the story of the shepherds, it's a group of shepherds up in the mountains, and they're dealing with their everyday interactions. They're getting together and their personalities. And one of the key characters is Bartolo, who is the rogue of the cast of characters. And my understanding was that the priest who encouraged the production in Chimayo back in I think it had to be in the late 1950s, the early 1960s, and he appointed Froilano to be Bartolo. So it tells me something about Froilán.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But again, this is something that I appreciate because it's a legacy, but I also appreciate encountering the relatives. And it's interesting when you start mentioning the Montoyas, how the connections start coming in, and the stories. It's just like my story of my tia Ramoncita who was in the hospital that night. There's a lot of stories that come out, and it's our wealth of our humanity, right? So, again, thank you very much. I just turned it off.
Thank you, Juanita. Oh, wrong one. Thank you. That was fabulous. Thank you for sharing your research and your relationships. That was very personal. And I'm thrilled that we have that information now forever is enormous. Otherwise, we would not. Thank you, everyone. This has been a blast. Another in the Weaving the New World series. We have one more coming up. We have Irving and Lisa Trujillo joining us next from Centennial in Chimayo. So that will be a blast. I'm sure they will bring examples of their work as well. So please don't miss that. As we mentioned, the exhibition will be open next door. So please get into the main gallery and see the Saltillos.
I just have one thing that I want to say about Irving, because if you see his piece in there, it almost rivals the complexity of the Saltillo. But Irving, I consider Irving the weaver of our tradition, because he was raised with a weaver who was raised with a weaver who was raised, this is like, what do you call it, baby milk blood that he grew up with. So I have the highest respect for Irving with his work.
Yeah, and that piece in there is amazing, especially with the gold thread. And then you see the direct Saltillo influence. It's really fun to see that continues, that all that trade coming into Taos hundreds of years ago, still influencing artistic traditions, is pretty cool. So yeah, please get over to the Luna Chapel after this. Check out the exhibition. It is fabulous. The main exhibition, the Saltillos, will be up through the end of March. So please tell everybody you know. We want every Taoseño and then some to see this exhibition because it is that extraordinary. And it sounds like we're going to hold over the Rio Grande exhibition through the summer because it is just so darn good. We don't want to see it go away just yet. So that'll give us a little more time to get more folks in to see that exhibition. So again, thank you. We have no endowment, so we fundraise for everything. If you enjoyed what you've been experiencing, please support the Couse-Sharp Historic Site. We need your support to keep these traditions alive and keep sharing this with folks and amplifying that story of Taos and northern New Mexico. So again, we don't charge for anything ever if we don't have to. So we do a fundraiser every other year that we do charge for, but that's it. So thanks, you guys. Have fun. We hope to see you again soon.